Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm Daniel.
And I'm Sarah. It's really nice to be here with you.
Today we want to talk about something that sounds big, but doesn't need to feel heavy.
Exactly. We're not here to give you a perfect plan or tell you to change everything.
We just want to talk about how this can still be your year.
Without pressure, without guilt, without feeling like you're late.
So if you're feeling tired, overwhelmed, or like you've already tried too many times,
This conversation is for you.
let's take a breath.
And start.
I think a lot of people carry this quiet feeling that time is running out. They look back and think, I should have started earlier, or I already lost my chance to change things. And that feeling is heavy, because it makes everything you want to improve feel urgent and stressful. When it comes to English, and honestly, life in general, many people feel like if they didn't start at the right moment, then it's too late. But the truth is, improvement doesn't depend on a special date or a perfect beginning. It depends on what you do consistently from where you are right now. You still have time, not because everything will suddenly be easy, but because progress doesn't disappear just because time passed. Every small action still counts, no matter when you start.
Yes, and this idea of being late is often self-created. We compare ourselves to where we think we should be instead of looking at where we actually are, and that comparison creates pressure instead of movement. People often think, if I had started months ago, I'd be better now. And that's probably true. But the more important question is, what happens if you don't start today either? What really matters is not the moment you should have started, but the moment you decide to continue. And that decision can happen on any ordinary day. No announcements, no big plans, just a quiet choice to keep going.
Another problem with this I'm late mindset is that it makes people want to rush. They try to do everything at once to compensate for lost time, and that usually leads to burnout. Instead of enjoying the process, they pressure themselves. English becomes something heavy again, something they need to fix, and that feeling makes consistency very hard. But when you accept that you still have time, something relaxes inside you. You stop racing, you stop punishing yourself, and suddenly, learning becomes lighter.
And that lightness is important, because real change rarely comes from pressure. It comes from space, from patience, from allowing yourself to grow slowly. So if you're listening right now and thinking, I should be further, I want you to hear this clearly. You're not late, you're just here, and here is enough to start. When people decide they want to change something in their lives, they often want to change everything at the same time. It feels motivating in the beginning. There's energy, excitement, and a strong desire to do better, but that energy usually doesn't last. The problem is not the desire to improve. The problem is the weight of too many expectations. When you try to change everything, you give yourself a huge list of rules. Study every day. Speak perfectly. Never miss a day. And when you break one rule, it feels like failure. This happens a lot with English. People create big plans, intense schedules, and high standards. And then real life appears. Work, stress, tiredness. And suddenly the plan feels impossible.
Yes, and when the plan feels impossible, people don't adjust it, they abandon it. They think, if I can't do it properly, what's the point? And that mindset turns small obstacles into stopping points. Trying to change everything also creates pressure to see results quickly. People want to feel different immediately. They want confidence fast. They want fluency now. But change doesn't work on that timeline. English is not something you fix in a few weeks. It's something you build slowly. And when your expectations don't match reality, frustration grows.
Another thing that happens is guilt. When people can't follow their big plan, they feel guilty. They start judging themselves. I'm lazy. I don't have discipline. But the issue was never discipline. The plan was just too heavy. Small changes are easier to repeat. And repetition is what creates habits. Habits don't need motivation. They need simplicity.
So instead of asking, how can I change everything? A better question is, what is one small thing I can keep doing? That shift changes everything. I think one of the biggest misunderstandings people have about progress is that they expect it to feel big. They expect it to look obvious, Like one day you wake up and suddenly you're confident, fluent, productive, organized, whatever your goal is. But most real progress doesn't show up like that. It shows up as small improvements that don't feel exciting in the moment. And because it doesn't feel exciting, people often stop too soon. They think, this isn't working, or I'm not improving. But what's really happening is that the change is happening quietly. It's building in the background. With English, small progress might look like this. You used to freeze when someone asked you a question. Now you can answer with a short sentence. Not perfect, but you answered. That's progress. Or maybe you still hesitate but you recover faster. That's progress too. Sometimes progress is simply feeling less scared, or feeling less tired after speaking, or not translating every word. These things may seem invisible, but they are huge.
Yes. And another reason people don't recognize progress is because they compare today's performance to their ideal version of themselves. They're not comparing to last month. They're comparing to perfect English in their imagination. So if they still make mistakes, they think nothing changed. But mistakes are not proof of failure. They're proof you're using the language. Small changes are powerful because they are realistic. They don't require a big emotional effort every day. They fit into your routine, and that is why they last. For example, imagine you decide to practice English for 5 minutes a day. Some people will say, 5 minutes? That's nothing. But 5 minutes every day is a habit, and habits build identity. After 2 weeks, you don't need to force yourself as much. After a month, English starts feeling normal. After a few months, you realize you've practiced more than most people who only study when they have time.
Exactly. And small changes don't only help with discipline, they help with fear. When the goal is small, your brain doesn't panic. If you tell yourself, today I will speak English for 30 minutes, your brain might resist. It feels big, it feels like a performance. But if you say, today I'll speak for 1 minute, it feels safe. And once you start, you often go longer naturally. This is why small changes are not just easier, they're smarter. They reduce resistance and increase consistency. Let's make it practical. Here are examples of small changes that create real progress in English. Instead of studying vocabulary, you use 3 new words in a sentence out loud. Instead of watching a video silently, you repeat 1 minute of it, shadowing. Instead of saying nothing in a conversation, you add one simple reaction like, I see, or that makes sense. Instead of waiting for the perfect phrase, you say the simple version and keep going. These are tiny actions, but they train the exact skill that builds fluency. Output.
And small changes also protect your energy. People often quit because they're tired, not because they don't care. They try to do too much. They expect perfect consistency. And then they miss 1 day and feel like they failed. But when your system is built on small actions, missing 1 day doesn't destroy everything. You can come back easily. There's no shame, no drama. You just continue. Progress becomes less emotional and more stable. Another thing I love about small changes is that they create trust. When you do something small consistently, you start trusting yourself again. You stop seeing yourself as someone who always starts and quits. You become someone who keeps going. And that identity shift is powerful.
So if you want real progress this year, in English or anything, don't ask yourself, what big plan can I create? Ask yourself, what small action can I repeat even on a bad day? Because the best habit is the habit you can do when you're tired, busy, or not motivated. That's the habit that survives real life. And when small changes survive, they grow. Slowly, naturally, almost without you noticing. Until one day you look back and realize, it worked.
One thing that rarely appears in conversations about learning English is kindness, especially kindness toward yourself. Most learners are very demanding. They expect consistency, motivation, discipline, and fast results. And when they don't meet those expectations, they become very harsh with themselves. People say things like, I'm lazy, or I'm terrible at languages, or I should be better by now. And those thoughts don't help. They don't create discipline. They create pressure. And pressure makes learning heavier, not better. Being kind to yourself doesn't mean being careless. It means being realistic. It means understanding that learning a language is a long process and that bad days are part of it.
Yes. And many people confuse kindness with lack of effort. They think if they stop pushing themselves, they'll stop improving. But that's not how it works. When you're constantly criticizing yourself, you don't feel motivated. You feel tired. Learning English already requires energy. You're thinking, translating, processing new sounds. If on top of that you're also fighting yourself mentally, it becomes exhausting. Kindness creates space. Space to make mistakes, space to speak imperfectly, space to come back after a break without guilt.
Another important part of being kinder to yourself is changing how you talk to yourself about English. Instead of saying, "I failed today," you can say, "Today was hard. I'll try again tomorrow." That small change in language changes how your brain reacts. When learning feels safe, you're more likely to practice. And practice is what matters.
So if you want this to be your best year, not just in English but in how you feel while learning, start here. Stop being your own enemy. Support yourself the way you would support a friend. One of the reasons English feels so difficult to maintain is because many people treat it like a separate project. Something that needs special time, special energy, and special motivation. It becomes an item on a to-do list, and when life gets busy, that item is the first one to be postponed. When English is separate from your life, it competes with everything else. Work, family, responsibilities, rest. And every time you don't make time for it, you feel guilty. That guilt slowly creates distance. English stops feeling like an opportunity and starts feeling like an obligation. But the truth is, English doesn't need to live outside your life. It can live inside it.
Yes. And this shift is much more mental than practical. People think integrating English means adding more work, but it's actually the opposite. It means using English to support what you already do. For example, instead of thinking about your day in your native language, you can think about it in simple English. "I need to finish this. I'll deal with that later. I'm tired today." These thoughts are already there. You're just changing the language. Another example is decision-making. You make dozens of small decisions every day. What to eat, what to answer, what to do next. Those moments are perfect for English, and they don't require extra time.
When English becomes part of your internal dialogue, it stops feeling artificial. You're not studying. You're using the language. And usage is what builds fluency. There's also an emotional difference. When English is separate, you judge yourself by how much you study. When English is integrated, you notice how often you use it. And that feels much more positive. Instead of thinking, "I didn't study today," you start noticing, "I used English several times today." That changes your relationship with the language.
Another important part of integration is relevance. Many learners study things that have nothing to do with their lives. Random topics, random vocabulary, and then they wonder why nothing sticks. When English is connected to your real life, your job, your routine, your feelings, it becomes meaningful. And meaningful language is easier to remember and easier to use. You're no longer learning English for some future version of yourself. You're using it now, in the life you already have.
And when English is part of your life, consistency becomes easier. You don't need perfect conditions. You don't need motivation. English is already there quietly every day. So if English keeps disappearing from your routine, don't ask yourself, "Why can't I stay consistent?" Ask yourself, "Why does English feel separate from my life?" Because once you bring it closer, everything becomes lighter.
A lot of frustration in learning English comes from the idea of success. Many people have a very rigid definition of what it means to be good at English. They imagine fluency as speaking fast, making no mistakes, and sounding confident all the time. And when their reality doesn't match that image, they feel like they're failing. But success in English doesn't need to look like perfection. In fact, for most people, real success looks much simpler and much more human. Success can be understanding more than you did before. It can be answering when you used to stay silent. It can be finishing a sentence without giving up. These moments don't look impressive from the outside, but they matter deeply.
Yes. And when success is defined only as fluency, people ignore all the progress happening along the way. They only look at what's missing, and that creates a constant feeling of being behind. Redefining success means shifting your focus from the end result to the process. Instead of asking, "Am I fluent yet?" you ask, "Am I more comfortable than I was last month?" And comfort is a very important sign of progress. When English feels less scary, less heavy, and more familiar, you're moving in the right direction.
Another important part of redefining success is accepting imperfection. Real communication is messy. Even in your native language, you hesitate, repeat yourself, change sentences. English is no different. So success is not speaking without mistakes. Success is communicating despite mistakes. It's staying in the conversation instead of escaping it.
When you change how you measure success, motivation changes too. You stop chasing an impossible standard and start recognizing real growth. And that recognition makes consistency easier, because you feel rewarded, not defeated. When people talk about improving their English, they often talk about motivation. They say, "I just need to feel motivated," or "I'm not motivated right now." But motivation is unreliable. It changes with your mood, your energy, and what's happening in your life. Habits are different. Habits don't ask how you feel, they simply exist. And that's why habits are much more powerful than motivation. If your English practice depends on feeling inspired, it will be inconsistent. Some weeks will be great, other weeks nothing will happen. But when English becomes a habit, it survives busy days, tired days, and even bad days.
Yes, and one of the biggest mistakes people make is trying to build habits that are too big. They decide to study for an hour every day or to speak English perfectly every morning. And that works for a short time, until it doesn't. Habits that last are small. They're almost boring. And that's a good thing. A habit like, "I will think in English while making coffee," or "I will speak English for 2 minutes before bed," doesn't require a lot of energy. And because it's easy, you're more likely to repeat it.
Another important thing about habits is attachment. Habits stick better when they're connected to something you already do, not something new you have to remember. For example, every time you open your laptop, you think one sentence in English about what you're about to do. Or every time you shower, you describe your plans for the day in English. These habits don't compete with your life, they ride along with it. And because they're attached to existing routines, they don't disappear easily. So if you want habits that actually last, make them small, attach them to your routine, and remove pressure. That's how English stays with you, not just for a few weeks, but for years.
Comparison is one of the quietest ways to lose motivation. It doesn't arrive loudly. It sneaks in when you see someone speaking better, faster, or more confidently than you. And suddenly, your own progress feels smaller than it really is. When learning English, comparison is everywhere. Social media, videos, classmates, coworkers. You hear someone speak and immediately think, "They're so much better than me." And instead of feeling inspired, you feel discouraged. The problem is that comparison usually ignores context. You don't know how long that person has been studying. You don't know how many mistakes they made. You only see the result, not the process.
Yes. And comparison also creates unrealistic expectations. People forget that learning paths are different. Some people need English every day for work. Some people live in English-speaking environments. Some people have more time, more exposure, or fewer emotional blocks. When you compare your journey to someone else's, you're comparing two completely different situations. And that comparison is never fair. Another issue is that comparison shifts your focus away from your own progress. Instead of asking, "Am I better than I was before?" you ask, "Am I as good as them?" And that question almost always leads to frustration.
Comparison also makes people silent. They think, "I'm not ready yet," or "I shouldn't speak until I'm better." And that silence slows progress even more. Letting go of comparison doesn't mean ignoring others. It means changing the reference point. Your only real comparison is your past self. How did English feel 3 months ago? 6 months ago? That's where progress lives.
When you stop comparing, learning becomes lighter. You stop rushing, you stop feeling behind, and you give yourself permission to grow at your own pace. And that permission is what keeps you moving forward. One of the reasons English feels distant for so many learners is because they don't use it to talk about their real lives. They practice English with artificial topics, textbook situations, or conversations that don't mean much to them. And when the language isn't connected to your life, it's hard to stay engaged. Using English to talk about your real life changes everything. Because now English is not just something you study, it's something you use to understand yourself, organize your thoughts, and express what's happening around you. You don't need advanced vocabulary to do this. Simple English is enough. What matters is relevance.
Yes, and real life includes emotions, not just actions. Many learners only practice English to describe tasks or facts, but life is also about feelings: stress, excitement, frustration, hope. And learning how to express those feelings in English makes the language feel more human. For example, saying things like, "I'm tired today," "I feel overwhelmed," or "I'm proud of myself" may seem simple, but they create a strong connection with the language. You're no longer just practicing English. You're using it as a tool for reflection. Another important point is that when you talk about your real life, you repeat similar ideas often, and repetition is what builds fluency.
Exactly. You talk about your job many times. You talk about your routine many times. You talk about your plans and problems again and again. That repetition creates familiarity, and familiarity creates confidence. This is why random topics don't stick as well. They appear once and disappear. But your life is always there. It gives you endless material to practice. Another benefit is that when English is connected to your real life, it becomes easier to speak spontaneously. You're not searching for ideas, you already know what you want to say.
And when the opportunity to speak with someone appears, you're more prepared. Because you've already practiced talking about yourself, your thoughts, and your experiences, even if it was only alone. So if English still feels distant, bring it closer. Use it to talk about what actually matters to you. That's when the language starts to feel alive. Pressure is one of the biggest enemies of progress. When learning English feels urgent, heavy, or stressful, the brain goes into protection mode. You hesitate more. You avoid speaking. You overthink everything. Many learners believe that pressure will push them forward. They think if they're strict enough, demanding enough, they'll improve faster. But in reality, pressure often slows things down. Progress doesn't need fear to exist. It needs safety.
Yes, and when learning feels safe, people experiment more. They try, they speak, they make mistakes and keep going. That's how skills grow.
Progress without pressure means allowing yourself to move at a pace you can maintain. Not the fastest pace, the most realistic one. It also means accepting that some days will be productive and some won't. And that's okay. Growth is not linear. Another important part of progress without pressure is letting go of deadlines. Language doesn't work well with strict timelines. You can have goals, but they need to be flexible. When people say, "I must be fluent by this date," they create unnecessary stress, and stress affects speaking more than any grammar mistake.
When pressure disappears, confidence has space to grow, and confidence changes how English feels. It becomes lighter, more natural, more accessible. So if you want real progress, ask yourself not, "How fast can I improve?" but "How can I make this sustainable?" When people think about having their best year, they usually imagine something visible. Big changes, big results, something that proves this year was different from the others. But most meaningful years don't feel extraordinary while you're living them. They feel normal, stable, grounded. What really makes a year your best year is not intensity, it's continuity. It's not starting over again and again. It's staying with something long enough for it to grow. With English, many people spend years in the same cycle. Start strong, stop, feel guilty, restart. And that cycle is exhausting. So sometimes the best year is simply the year you stop restarting. The year you stop saying, I'll begin again on Monday, and start saying, I'll continue today.
Yes. And another thing people don't realize is that your best year doesn't need to feel good all the time. It doesn't mean every day is productive or inspiring. It means you stayed present even on the boring days, even on the difficult days. Those are the days that build real skills. Not the days when motivation is high, but the days when you show up anyway, calmly, without drama. For many learners, the best year is the year English stops being a source of shame, the year they stop hiding, the year they stop apologizing for their level, the year they allow themselves to be learners again. That emotional change is often more important than any technical improvement.
Another sign that it's becoming your best year is when English stops feeling like a problem you need to solve. It becomes something you live with. Some days it goes well, some days it doesn't. And that's okay. You stop measuring your worth by your performance. You stop judging yourself every time you make a mistake. And that freedom allows you to speak more, not because you're better, but because you're less afraid. And less fear always leads to more practice.
Your best year is also the year you stop waiting. You stop waiting for confidence. You stop waiting for fluency. You stop waiting to feel ready. You understand that readiness is not something that appears first. It's something that grows after action. And maybe the most important thing is this. Your best year is not something you announce. It's something you build quietly, day by day, without pressure.
So, if you're wondering what will make this your best year, don't look for big moments. Look for steady presence. Look for fewer restarts and more continuation. Because when you continue, change has time to happen. If there's one idea we want to leave with you at the end of this episode, it's this. You're not late. You didn't miss your chance. You didn't fail because you didn't start earlier or because you stopped before. Life doesn't move in straight lines. Learning doesn't either. And English is not something that punishes you for pauses. It waits for you. You're not behind. You're just at a different point in the process. And that point is valid.
Yes. And sometimes the feeling of being late comes from comparing your timeline to someone else's. But your journey is your own. What matters is not how long it took you to get here. It's that you're here now. You still have time to build habits that feel lighter. You still have time to change how English fits into your life. And you still have time to enjoy the process more than you did before. Your best year doesn't need a perfect beginning. It just needs continuation.
So don't wait for the next right moment. Don't wait to feel ready. Don't wait to feel confident. Use English today in a small way. One sentence, one thought, one moment of presence.
Because progress doesn't come from pressure. It comes from consistency. And consistency starts now.
Thanks for spending this time with us.
And remember,
You're not late.
you're right on time to continue.